Hey guys, it's the 435 podcast. I'm Robert McFarland. I got my guest here, Mayor Chris Hart, a longtime mayor, longtime civil servant. We had a great conversation about water. This episode was totally worth watching about water. All these other episodes, we don't talk about water much. This one, for sure, you want to listen to. We talked a lot about water, but economic development, affordable housing, how Ivins has done with Black Desert, and are leading the way in how sustainability should work in town. But I hope you guys enjoy the episode. Make sure you drop your information in the comments. This is we're out to get discourse. Let's talk to each other, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or wherever you're at. Jump in the comments, start participating in the discourse, get out the vote, rock the vote 2023. And that's it. Hope you enjoy the episode, especially 03 through 05. That was like a huge boom, right?
Yeah, well, and
but a couple other times too.
And so they faced that very concern.
Mm-hmm.
They have limited access to Colorado River water.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have much in the way of additional other water resources.
Mm-hmm.
So their answer was to get into the water reuse business.
Hey guys, we're rolling.
Perfect. Good to know. Thanks, Jeff.
And their solution was to recapture every drop of water, ultimately, that drains down through houses and businesses, process it, put it back into Lake Mead, and then bring it back through their system again and treat it to drinking water grade.
So their reuse system. So real quick for everybody just jumping in, we're talking about Las Vegas. Their reuse system feeds back into Lake Mead. Is that what you're saying?
Ultimately. So they use the same drop of water
over and over and over and over.
Half a dozen times.
Right.
Well, that
half a dozen times, like 6 times. Is that the actual number or?
So take your pick.
I know.
Who knows?
That's part of the conversation too, right? It's like counting.
But their objective is to increase the number of times.
Right.
And the way that they've done that is to minimize the use of water on the outside of homes and businesses,
mm-hmm.
because that water is lost. It's used once and lost. Okay. Goes into the ground,
mm-hmm.
but they don't have any way to recapture it and reuse it. So you've watched over the years Las Vegas systematically increase the restrictions on outdoor water use.
Mm-hmm.
Their landscape ordinances are probably the toughest in the country. And recently they barred altogether outdoor non-functional grass. You simply can't put it in.
Yeah. So you're talking
then they're
like
paying,
bluegrass, like what you would think your lawn back.
Grass,
yeah.
Lawn.
Yeah, lawn.
Because lawn is the biggest enemy. Take a square foot of your lawn, you probably have some grass at your home.
Not a single little bit.
Not a single drop.
Because I live in Ivins, Utah. Because I live in Ivins, Utah. Earth,
that's right.
Water, and hard work.
Well, so picture a square foot of grass anywhere, and put 6 feet of water on top of it, and that's the annual water use that it takes to sustain grass.
Mm-hmm.
So that's equivalent to you pulling the cover off your swimming pool and letting it sit there for a year, and all of the water would be gone. So the evaporative transfer from grass is extreme, and that's why Las Vegas and now Washington County have grass or turf buyback programs. So you could actually be paid if you had a small front yard that you weren't using for any kind of activity.
And I think it's like $2 a square foot.
$2 a square foot.
Yeah.
And that's the same as Las Vegas
mm-hmm.
offers. But Las Vegas has been doing this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're incentivizing the reduction of water use on the exterior and legislating that same concept, so that the vast majority of their water comes through a recapturable system.
Got it.
They've gone out into what were formerly rural parts of the Las Vegas Valley that have now filled in, and trying to get everyone that's on a septic tank into the sewer system. Why? Because all that effluent flows down a pipeline, goes to a treatment plant, and the recaptured water then is processed to the next
They squeeze
next
every drop of water they can out of the desert.
And that's how Las Vegas has continued to grow.
Right.
So let's translate this concept now to Washington County.
Which is great because we get the lessons of all the mistakes they made. And
well,
we get,
and the benefit,
of
all
the
of the solid thinking that they've put into their system.
Yeah.
So Washington County, for the last, as long as I can remember, 25 years, has banked on the Lake Powell Pipeline as being kind of the savior of their water situation.
To the tune of about $40 million, right?
Well, it started out as 1.2 billion. Now
what they've spent already. So what I was told is that what they've already spent in, just time, cost, their hard costs like $40 million.
Mostly environmental and legal work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they've spent a lot of money on it. And back in the day, I mean, you have to take things in historic context. It's one thing to be here and now with the social norms and political environment that we now live in.
Yep.
But go back 25 years. Utah had all of these Colorado River water rights that they had not utilized, and so it was entirely reasonable to think that we could draw a substantial amount of water out of the Colorado to supply the needs of southwest Utah. Well, as that process went on, because nothing happens quickly in the water world.
So the Lake Powell Pipeline, I just want to make sure I understand this. The whole idea from inception started 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. 25 years ago.
And then in sort of conceptualizing how are we going to solve the future water problems of southwest Utah.
That was an idea that really caught on. They're like, okay, this is something.
And it caught on because Utah had the rights. Lake Powell was the bathtub out of which we'd draw the water, right? The cup that we'd put the straw in. And so it was a matter of figuring out how to get the water from there to here. And Utah stood behind it. In fact, it's actually a Utah state project, not a district project.
Right.
Well, it was no surprise. There was a lot of environmental resistance to the project. The pipeline was long and came through some.
This is right around. What was the vice president? He did the Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore.
Oh yeah,
Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. I think came out in 1999. Jeff, check me on that. 1999. This would have been right around that same time frame, where all of a sudden all this environmental pressure to exhaust as many resources as possible to determine if a development is going to be good for the environment or not.
Well, Congress, authorized through the Clean Water Act and so forth, agencies to develop an increasing body of regulation, right? And that regulation has been used as a tool. And I don't fault environmentalists. There are concerns out there as to what happens when you disturb as much land as would be disturbed to bring a pipeline that far, a big one.
Yep.
Electrical plants along the way, using the downflow off a slope to generate power to power the pumps that are bringing it up.
Super complicated.
From the lake, right? So all of that began to move from a speculative concept into a design concept, and then going through the NEPA processes, the environmental processes, if you will, to allow it to get authorized. Well, over that long period of time, primarily the last, say, 15 years, and even more so the last 10, all of these obstacles to the Lake Powell Pipeline coming to be sort of came together in a perfect storm and ended up with the lower basin states. Are you aware? Are you familiar with that term? So the lower basin states filed suit to prevent the Lake Powell Pipeline from being built. California is a pretty obstinate partner in the Colorado River Compact. Interestingly, they do, I think, in my opinion, very little to reduce their consumption. Their approach is to litigate against all of the other states and demand their share and more of the available Colorado River water, and that's continued to this very day.
Yeah,
they've most recently sued Southwest Utah, claiming that they have an entitlement to a higher percentage of Virgin River drainage water as well. So we always seem to be in a fight with California. Well, I'm kind of getting off the point here.
But to go back to this, the Inconvenient Truth started in 2006, and your point Your point being, which I appreciate, is that it's not the environmental process did not delay this. Is that what your stance is?
No,
really?
no. It has delayed it.
So the environmental.
So the NEPA documents.
The NEPA documents.
The required documentation.
But let's say, hold on, maybe clarify. Let's say we go through the environmental stuff, which I think is important, especially because you're talking about Native American lands. There's all these different organizations, people. The ownership isn't as simple as let's put 10 people in a room and say, is this something we all agree to, right? It's not that. It's a lot more complicated than that. And the environmental specifically is it's going through canyons, ups and downs. It's not like this flat plateau, right? That you just like kind of just keep building it on. So the environmental process, I think, is important. But at a certain point, 25 years, you're saying maybe 10 years was environmental? Or like, how is this, if you look at it in a timeline?
That environmental process began, I think, around 15 years ago.
Okay.
And it begins by hiring professional engineering firms that specialize in doing this environmental work to do studies, investigate the land, find out what the archaeological areas are, what endangered species of plants and animals exist, and a variety of things. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very complicated thing.
It's not just looking for the one like bird that may go extinct or like the one fish. Isn't there like something up in San Francisco where there's one fish that they're trying to preserve?
There's one fish nearly everywhere in the country.
Everywhere, right? But that's not necessarily what the point of this whole process is.
Well, the process is to demonstrate that there are ways to mitigate the impacts of putting such a pipeline in place.
Right.
And there were firms and legal firms as well that were hired to navigate that NEPA process. And the environmental documents made it as far as the federal level before the last election. Well, there's an unfriendly administration now that refuses to actually sign it off and allow it to be built.
Yeah.
And now it's complicated further by the fact that there is pending litigation from the lower basin states. So the Lake Powell Pipeline is in kind of a stall, I'll just put it that way. It's still a major part of the long-term planning for water for this region, but it is not moving forward, or at least it is at a snail's pace at best. So bringing us back to my neighborhood meetings, I simply explained that we are getting to the end of this resource, and I used, unfortunately or unfortunately, however you choose to look at it, a term that I coined referring to the Lake Powell Pipeline as the Lake Powell Pipe Dream.
Yeah.
And said, someone asked, are we running out of water? And I said, well, yes, we are. And then went on to explain what that meant, just as I did with you.
Right.
So
we're always running out of water in southern Utah. I think is a point that I want to drive through.
No, that's actually true.
And I've talked about this with a couple of the other guests. And, I had even said on the last pod, it was our first episode of this series, specifically on if Joe Biden wasn't the president, the pipeline would probably be way further ahead. If Trump had won, the process probably would have moved along a lot quicker.
I think that's a fair statement to make.
And the stall is not just in the litigation, because litigation means a judge has to say, no, you cannot move forward with this pending this specific lawsuit, which I don't think a judge would have enough evidence to show, because the rights are already there for southern Utah, right? The agreements are already, the statutes are already there. If they're gonna be suing for us to not be able to move forward with it, they'd have to have a really dang good reason.
You'd think it would be as simple as that. But Utah's water rights, the majority of Utah is an upper basin, Utah in general is considered an upper basin state, but Southwest Utah is lower basin.
Right.
So Utah's solution was to transfer some of their rights as an upper basin state to Lake Powell, which is in the lower basin, and draw from that. So it'd be basically pouring water from one cup into another.
Yeah, I'm like, doesn't it go through Vernal before it gets there?
And saying, okay, we're going to put the straw in the other cup, and that's what we're going to drink from.
Right.
But that has also been challenged. So it's far more complicated than either you or I would like it to be, right? Well, the state is still moving forward. In fact, they went as far as to create the Colorado River Commission at a state level to deal strictly with Colorado River related issues. And with the fact that the compact, the 1921 or 2 compact, Colorado River Compact, is going to be reviewed in 2026, which is a huge concern because you've got powerful political lobbies, particularly in California, but Arizona as well, and Southern Nevada is very influential body politic as well. So Utah is going to have to fight to retain the rights that it currently has. Well, all this is kind of sidebar. I make this statement honestly to my residents, and the term Lake Powell Pipe Dream does not mean and never meant that it would never come about. It's simply that it's kind of gone from, the engines pulling forward to, hey,
back on the shelf.
It's kind of in dreamland right now, because who knows when we're going to have a favorable administration or.
Well, yeah, you'd have to have a favorable administration to land. All of a sudden, these lawsuits to be, managed, which we know they could probably just keep extending. You get to 2026, and now you're having to renegotiate the whole thing, and this is just one part of it, right?
So it's complicated. Let's just put it that way. And it became apparent to me as a member of the Water Conservancy District Board, and Zach Renstrom, who took the place of the previous, general manager, realized that we needed to shift, we needed to change directions and focus on conservation primarily, and then develop an expanded reuse system. So that's really what the focus of the district is now. And so my statement had been recorded because it was available on Zoom by somebody, and it ended up in the hands of KSL up in Salt Lake and the Deseret News. And the next thing I knew, I have a couple of reporters calling me to ask me about my comment. And I explained it, as I am to you.
Yeah.
But it actually made it to CNN, and I got a call from Bill Weir's producer. He's their chief climate guy, and saying they'd like to come out and interview me. And I said, well, okay, welcome to come. Everybody's welcome at Ivins. And so they sent out a crew. I'd convinced them that they needed to talk to Zach Renstrom more than myself. He's the one who knows the most about our regional water system.
Yeah.
But they came to Ivins City Hall, and very, very nice. Loved meeting with them. A CNN van shows up and 6 people jump out, and one guy's got a drone in the air immediately taking pictures of the area. But we just walked up and down the sidewalk in front of City Hall just talking about water. Yeah. And I'm speculating, but because of previous coverage that the St. George area has gotten in national and international media, I speculated that they were coming down to reemphasize the fact that we didn't care, that we were overusing water, that we didn't have any conservation measures in place.
Interesting.
And that we're kind of the dum-dums of Washington
backwater,
County, right?
The backwater,
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, we were parading up and down in front of Ivins City Hall.
Which is amazing, by the way.
Which I was able to.
It is one of my favorite buildings in all of Washington County.
Thank you. Yeah,
it is so awesome.
It's fantastic.
And then
we'll talk about that in a minute.
I hadn't heard how they built that wall, and in the address you were talking about it. I'm like, that is so cool.
Yeah, anyway, we'll get to that. It's a fun topic.
Yeah.
But we're walking up and down in front of City Hall, and I point over to our landscaping, and I said, so for example, Bill, the landscaping around our new City Hall requires 0 irrigation water. We have drippers that we ran to the plants to get them rooted, and they're turned off. So we don't use any water on the exterior of that new building.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I reminded him or explained to him that Ivins City's average household water use, and I'm going to detour here once again.
No, that's okay.
Almost always.
This is the show. The show's like detours. It's my favorite thing to do.
Almost always in national coverage, when comparisons are being made to water use, they use what's called a per capita water use, right? Per capita per day water use, meaning how much water you use in your household on a given day.
So I take a shower, drinking whatever I'm cook, those things.
The problem is, and always has been, that there is no standard, no federal standard, no state standard as to how you calculate that. So
Everybody calculates
So
it
cities
differently,
like
yeah.
Las Vegas do it on what's called a depletion basis. Well, they reuse the same water 10 times, and they get to deduct that out of their equation. So it makes it look like they're using no water.
Right.
When in fact, using this other metric, average household use, so your household here, somebody's household in Las Vegas, somebody else's household in Phoenix or anywhere in the Southwest. That to me is a reasonable metric because there's a standard for that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a household. Here's how much water that goes through it in a year.
Right.
In Ivins, it's exactly the same as Las Vegas.
See?
See.
There's the last week tonight with John Oliver, and maybe I'll get deplatformed for bringing up his name, but he did an article. Did you see that video that he had done? This was in 2020, and he talked specifically about Southern Utah's water and how we've mismanaged water.
Yeah.
And it was horrendous.
Well,
littered with
highly critical
false facts.
Yes, and
littered
there you
with
go.
False facts.
There's national and international media in a nutshell, and I have to say, I give CNN high marks because I told Bill Weir the truth about the area, the truth about our city, talked about the conservation ordinance that we have in place, that is nearly identical in many ways to that that's in place in Las Vegas, for example. And the CNN piece, if you saw it or read it, was actually very fair.
Yeah.
But I'm firmly convinced that that's because we were allowed to present the facts. And here is a person with integrity who built the story on the facts, not on any preconceived story that they came here to tell.
Yeah. And that's good. And maybe that's why I haven't seen it. So, and we have to continue to tell our own story. I've said this a couple of times, but I was told this at one point. If you don't tell your story, somebody else is going to. Right? If you don't explain...
Even if you tell your story, somebody's going to tell it differently.
Yeah, they're going to twist it. So you have to be able to have a genuine... And this is kind of the whole point of this show too, right? Is that how do we get local information to, the locals that live here or people that want to move here? Because we have people come from all over the world and they might not know the water situation that we do have, which is not dire from my own personal opinion. Some people would say it's dire, but I think we have a lot of really smart people that have been working on this for a really long time. The Lake Powell Pipeline sounds like a disaster. Like it was, for whatever reason, I don't know why it would have possibly taken 25 years only to get us right back to a dream. Like what could have possibly derailed? Because it's still a good idea, but they put all their cards in on that one idea. Do you feel like that happened or no? Because for a long time, we really haven't started making these reuse systems. We didn't start that until when? 2015, 2013? Were they mandated?
I don't
where
remember
developers...
exactly. So all of these things have been on the radar.
Yeah.
And in all fairness to everyone who's been advancing different ideas through the years, the Lake Powell Pipeline, as much criticism as it's received, was the most practical of the options. So should we have focused more on conservation back then? Absolutely. And we had Conserve Southwest Utah advocating that. They had a study done by Western Resource Advocates, a lady by the name of Amelia Nuding, I hope I got that right, who wrote an article, I think it was entitled An Alternative to the Lake Powell Pipeline. And their contention was that basically we could conserve our way out of the need for the pipeline. That in combination with a reuse program, agricultural conversion, that is as fields are developed into housing, that water can be brought into the water system.
Yep.
And
it's a multiplier because of how much...
She made a very compelling case, right? And conservation-minded people around the area looked at that and thought, okay, that makes sense. I actually asked for her to be brought in as one of the presenters at a water symposium that we had several years ago because I was intrigued by her point of view. But the fact of the matter is that for whatever reasons, for one thing, the Lake Powell Pipeline is the only redundant source of water that's been in any of the discussions about how do we increase our capacity. Right now, we rely completely 100% on the Virgin River and the Virgin River drainage, which includes the Santa Clara River. So whatever happens here in our little area of the country determines our water situation.
Yeah.
So you look at that one issue alone, redundancy, that was reason enough, in my opinion, to pursue the Lake Powell Pipeline. Yes. Right. You've got a year where there's no water in the Virgin River system, and at least here's a water supply.
Yeah, we could just keep Sand Hollow always full because we have pumps that pump from Sand Hollow to all the other reservoirs, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is you drop that into Sand Hollow, and Sand Hollow will be kind of like a pump for the rest of the reservoirs.
Well, not so much the reservoirs as to provide water to the treatment plant, which is then pumped to all of our residences and businesses, right?
Okay, got it.
That's really sort of system headquarters is for storage is Sand Hollow Reservoir, and equally importantly, the sand aquifer that's beneath Sand Hollow. Tell me about what do you know about that? Because I've heard a couple of things, but I'm fascinated with it. Tell me about that, or tell everybody who's listening about that. Well, there's something under every reservoir, right?
Right.
Some reservoirs, it's so porous that unless they put some kind of a liner in the reservoir, the water just drains down into Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. Well, the sandstone base under Sand Hollow Reservoir is a very absorbent material. So the geotechs determined that we could store as much water under Sand Hollow Reservoir as we could hold above grade in the reservoir.
Yeah.
And that process has been developing over the last several years since the reservoir was built. Mm-hmm. We haven't reached capacity down there, but we have a number, at least a dozen or more, pumps that surround the reservoir that have the capability of drawing water out of that system.
That's crazy.
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic, and such an adaptive move for us to see. Okay, what's an advantage? What is the desert giving us as an advantage to capturing water? And sandstone's it, right? The petrified sandstone. Weeping Rock. Somebody told me that what's coming out of Weeping Rock is hundreds of years old. Right?
I don't doubt that.
So it's just hundreds or thousands of years of water draining into the sandstone that surrounds and the earth that surrounds Zion comes out of Weeping Rock, and it's thousands and thousands of years old because it started at the very top of the ridge and has just worked its way slowly down.
Sure.
And so there's a ton of water trapped in these rocks, and we've just kind of created our own little version of that, which is fascinating and gives a different meaning to Sand Hollow.
It does.
So you think Sand Hollow, you're like, oh, like the hollow in the field, but no, this is a hollow rock full of water.
Well, it's a very important thing, technically speaking, that we have that additional reserve available, because we've been going through, as you know, a 1,200-year historic drought.
Yeah.
Now, we've got
a couple years ago, we went like 240 days in a row or something like that, 260 days in a row, no water. That's crazy.
So we've been given a temporary reprieve. At least the climate scientists claim it's temporary.
Yeah.
They don't really have an explanation as to why we have this massive snowpack and supply of water this year.
So atmospheric river. Well, the way I understood it from the weather guys was atmospheric river.
Had you ever heard of that before?
I hadn't either.
Now, it's probably been a technical term for decades, right?
Yep.
But that's what was used to explain this massive volume of water that was literally flowing over the ocean across California and dumping half of it there, and then the rest of it in these other western states.
Yeah, it's crazy. If you watch the radar, it looks like Jeff's pulling something up. So I went on a deep dive. I went on a total deep dive on this because I was so fascinated. It's the equivalent of 2 Amazon River flows dumping into the Pacific Ocean nonstop. It's like God turned on the faucet in the sky, and the equivalent of 2 Amazon River flows are dumping into the Pacific Ocean between here and Hawaii. And it's a consistent stream of storms, and they're like whipping at the very end, which is causing these little spiral storms to go from Southern California up right into us, is essentially kind of how you watch it. And there's like a time-lapse video of it that you can watch it happening just kind of nonstop this summer. I guess it's been for like the last 12 months, but I guess we're getting into where it's supposed to stop. So we'll see if it stops, but it's crazy to me that we had that much water in a storm system dropping in the ocean, and none of us would ever know, right? Unless we're watching it on the radar. And then the climate scientists, we haven't been measuring. We can't say that this thing has been happening as far back as we could go for testing these things. Like, I bet you it's probably not even 100 years. And that's not enough data.
So however you choose to look at it,
yeah,
it's a miraculous thing.
It is miraculous. This is a prayer. The prayer for the governor, he better get some credit from it, because everybody, CNN or all the media news outlets were making fun of the National Day of Prayer for Water, but we got it. So it worked. Looking back at time, it definitely worked.
I haven't heard very many of those outlets making reference to God and his
they wouldn't do that
in this.
They should.
Anyway, fascinating thing. Mm-hmm. And now here we are with sufficient snowpack to raise. I mean, there are different estimates as to what's going on. Mm-hmm. The Bureau of Reclamation claims that we're going to see Lake Powell rise 50 to 60 feet, and Lake Mead, we don't know exactly, but there's speculation that that's going to rise as much as 50 feet as well. Mm-hmm. Well, that's an enormous amount of water. And incidentally, while we're talking water in these lakes, the Lake Powell Pipeline would have utilized 6 inches of the top of Lake Powell every year. So it's not like we're draining the reservoir to try and provide some additional water to southwest Utah. Another flawed or faulty reference that's been made many times is that that the river wouldn't survive without the Lake Powell.
The other thing that doesn't make any sense to me is that the water's going to keep going. We're taking it from Lake Powell, but it was ultimately going to go to the states that really are arguing, because California is getting a benefit of the Virgin River. If we just take it from the Lake Powell into ours, and then we keep sending it down, because eventually, we use it, but then we also have a certain allotted amount that's supposed to go down the river once we finished with it. We're not.
Yeah, it ends up going into Mexico and ultimately into the Baja if there's any left over.
Right. So
that's where the Colorado.
It's still got to go to Mead. It's still going to go to Mead.
Goes
right?
to Mead. Uh-huh.
So really, ultimately, the argument is between us and Mead. It doesn't make sense to me why California has a big say in it when you're saying, well, California, you're going to benefit from us taking from that ultimately, because we're going to bring it here and it's going to keep going down there. Yeah, I don't understand.
There's some flawed logic there.
Okay.
California has the oldest, most secure water rights on the Colorado.
Okay.
And they make that, they wave that flag constantly. So Utah was guaranteed a percentage of the flow, as was Arizona, New Mexico, and all Nevada. Of the rest of the upper states.
Yeah.
Well, Nevada is its own weird little story.
Oh, really? Okay.
Nevada sent somebody who had no vision for the future to the conferences, the discussions on the compact,
mm-hmm.
and Nevada basically said, we're never going to need it. So the compact body ended up allocating a very small allocation to Nevada after they basically said we don't need any of it.
Oh, sure.
Well, I think they've burned effigies of, I can't remember his name, but right. So,
oh my gosh, that was not great planning. And they've still done a lot. I mean, the funny thing is that Vegas has grown massively. Yeah, they could have used it, but he also said, well, I don't think we'll need it. And
they've tripled their population or more since they ran out of water.
Yeah.
But back to the California situation, they were, out of the compact, they were guaranteed a volume of water. So now we've watched the flow of the Colorado drop down by a third.
Okay, so the speed California, filling it.
Huh?
So the rate, so the flow.
No, the volume.
So they get the volume total, but the flow is choked.
It's in. So
sorry,
Utah, the other states are guaranteed a percentage of the flow.
Got it.
California is guaranteed a number of acre feet, regardless of the flow.
Got it.
So they're kind of the hog in the trough, right? Mm-hmm. They take their share regardless, and for decades have taken more than their share. Once again, in my opinion, Imperial Valley, which the Imperial Valley Water District, which uses Colorado River water, has done very little to in the way of requiring conservation measures in their area of service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's despicable to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's drying up from the end back to the source,
Yep.
essentially, right? And so those are the ones that should be doing it first, but it's like everybody else along the way is supposed to conserve, but not the ones at the end of the line.
And there they are sitting on the Pacific Ocean and have basically said, we're not going to build any more desalinization
Right.
plants. Even when Arizona and Las Vegas, but Nevada, have agreed to build a desal plant and pay for its operation to provide water to California in exchange for them being able to utilize that exchanged volume of water upstream. But there's no response. There's no positive response to that. So it's hard to like California for me right now. Anyway.
Oh my gosh. I'm thinking about, because you talked about water desalinization. I was looking at what they're doing in Saudi Arabia and how they're using solar to vaporize salt water. Then they take the minerals of what's left over in the salt, which actually happens to be a massive amount of lithium and gold and all kinds of stuff that is in this water that they then process and are reusing and creating batteries out of it. So not only are they flash steaming the water to produce power by a steam engine, essentially, using solar energy, they reuse what's left over, the sludge left over, and are creating batteries out of it.
So there are incredible technologies out there like the ones you've described. Take a look at Israel. I mean, we'll focus on the Middle East because desert, right?
It's a great example for us to look over. Like if we were to just take a second and look over the Middle East and say, hey, what are you doing over there for water? Because we're very similar.
Israel kind of led the way. When you go through Israel itself, a desert,
mm-hmm.
and see what they've been able to achieve in the agricultural arena, but desalinization is a huge component of their water system,
mm-hmm.
and they knew it decades ago. They have advanced the technology and they have utilized it through much of their country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible to do it. The question is, now we need to be very clear about something. Whether you're using solar panels or however you're processing the water, it's very expensive water at its best.
Yeah.
It's very expensive water.
Yeah.
Now,
this article right here, it says one of the driest places in the world, and they make more fresh water than they need. One of the driest places in the world. Crazy, Israel.
So why we as a country are a little bit on the arrogant side.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, hey, if we didn't come up with it,
yeah,
it's not worth
it must not be very good technology
when really,
or something.
We need to be looking elsewhere for a lot of the answers to our problems.
Yeah.
And sadly, we've failed to do that in many respects.
Yeah, because there's like Iceland, they have all these different, geothermal, and they have all these energy sources that are really easy on the environment, but their costs are insane. Their taxes, the local area taxes, and the cost of living there is extremely higher than, especially us in St. George. It's already tough and not very affordable to live here at some financial level, but there's a cost to those things, right? Just because we have the answer doesn't mean that it makes sense financially. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but unless you're living in North Korea or whatever, nobody's making you stay.
True.
And nobody's making those folks stay. So the cost of water is a reality that they deal with, right?
Yeah.
But look at the compensations, right? If I were living there and I wrote down the pros and cons of living there, obviously the majority of those people have decided, well, the pros outweigh the cons, and the cost of water being one of those.
Well, it's an interesting thought, though, to think, because how long have you lived in St. George?
25 years.
25 years. And you've heard this probably more than anybody else, or as much as anybody else has ever heard it. But, people that they have a heritage here. Heritage is such an important thing to the people that live here. And, people that grew up here in the 90s, at a certain point, everybody knew everyone. not but a generation ago. And that idea that we're going to get so expensive that our kids can't live here, or the idea that somebody lives here and is from here, that's not as common. I hear that a lot. People are worried about that. And some of these costs push that population out first, if the wages and their ability to survive and
they
are pushed out.
Southern Utah sadly has the double whammy, right? Prevailing wage, maybe 80% of the state or national norm, and cost of housing, the highest in the state. So that doesn't work for a lot of folks.
Right.
And if it weren't for the low level of unemployment, in other words, high level of opportunity, and emerging industries like tech and otherwise, it'd be really tough. Mm-hmm. But even at that, so you told me that you're married. I don't know if you have a family or not.
Yep, 3 boys.
So there you go. So did we. And these days it seems like families are much less nuclear than they used to be. In other words, once the kids are grown, educated, who knows where they're going to end up.
Yep.
But
a lot of times they're in multiple places.
You'd still like it to be possible for your children, if they decided that they wanted to, that they like the area enough to remain here. And that is becoming an increasingly difficult thing.
Yeah.
So affordable housing, and I use that term almost with contempt, because there is no such thing. You're in real estate.
Yep.
It's a mirage. It's something to talk about more than it is to do things about. But there are some things that we could and should be doing to try and provide housing for all income levels in the area. Now, here we live in the United States of America, private property rights, right?
Correct.
Governments, the federal government has housing programs, but in our case, as Ivins residents, we don't qualify for any of them. We're too small.
Right.
So, and the only way that you can look at and say, okay, people got affordable housing by such and such happening, it boils down to subsidies.
Right.
Federal subsidies, other kinds of subsidies, the self-help programs, Habitat for Humanity, and there are others, come in and provide free labor and discounted materials and a financing program that allows the lucky lottery winner to get into a home at an affordable mortgage rate, let's put it that way, at an affordable payment.
Right.
Now, in their case, I believe the requirement is 7 years that someone has to retain ownership of that home. But ultimately, in all of these cases, subsidized housing, self-help programs, ultimately, those houses end up being sold at market value. Mm-hmm. So if you're the lottery winner, I call them, if you're the lucky candidate who has a home built for you by Habitat, for example, at some point in time, all of those discounts become a windfall to you.
Yeah.
When it's sold at market value, all of the advantages that you had become dollars in your wallet.
Right.
And that element, that component of the affordable housing program in your city, bye-bye.
Yeah,
because now it's out there at market value and it's no longer affordable.
So that's why there's a couple like community land trusts. Have you seen this?
This is something, concept? Yes, not only seen it, I've been advocating this for the last dozen years.
And we got a couple in town, I think. I think there's 2 so far, but for sure I know of one that they're working on, looking for land as affordable as they can. And what it does is it retains the ownership of the property.
Correct.
And then the sticks on top of it and the foundation and all the stuff on top is given to the owner. And now they could put deed restrictions on it to where it has to be sold at a certain subset of the market on the resale.
I've been advocating for a number of years with Senator Romney's office, most recently with Senator Lee's office, Congressman Stewart. I've met with their staff many times. Here's the secret, and the land trust is a key component of that, and it's my intent to create one of those in Ivins City. With these massive resort developments coming into town and the need for workforce housing, we're going to have to do something. So
I'm glad you brought that up.
The program to me is that by whatever means, donated property,
Purchase property.
property that is placed into the trust to accomplish this specific goal. And let's face it, we've got one of the biggest land trusts of probably any state in the union in Sitla alone.
In Sitla.
And I've been advocating with Sitla, I can't tell you, years now, that Sitla's mission is to support education, the school system, right?
And institutions within that body decides
We can't keep teachers here. Every year we build 2 new schools, or have done, and bring in teachers to supplement the need there.
Mm-hmm.
And they stay a year, they can't afford a house, so they move away. And I've advocated that Sitla function in the capacity of one of these land trusts to do this very thing. And here's how it works.
Amen. I agree.
Here's how it works. The land is retained by the trust. The deed to the land is permanently with the land trust. Now that gives you some real advantages. So in combination with some qualified developer who knows how to do more affordable housing,
right.
So under whatever program the trust decides, more affordable types of housing are built on the land that this trust owns.
Right.
So here's the magic. It's sold. Now, once again, this has to be to a qualified buyer.
Mm-hmm.
This has to be to somebody who meets either income criteria, they work for the resort that provided the property, or in the Sitla's case, you are either a teacher or school administrator or whatever. That's what qualifies you to file to be a participant in this program.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're the lucky one. You get to buy the home.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of the land is removed from the overall purchase price of the home. You don't get the land, but you don't have to pay for it either.
What percentage of the overall price do you think in a normal appraisal? Like, how much is the land going to account for?
Oh,
I can't remember.
It varies, maybe 20%.
20%. I would have said 20 to 25%.
Yeah. So that cost is gone. Well, this creates a simple mathematic equation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the cost of the home as the numerator. At the time of sale, a market appraisal is done. In other words, establish the value, and that includes the land.
Right.
Here's what, if this was in a normal
Retail.
situation, here's what that home would cost. Well, there's your fraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that let's say the numerator is 300,000 and the denominator is 400,000, just for simple math.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that equation becomes the deed restriction.
Right.
So when you decide that you're going to move on, you've got to get a bigger house, your family's grown, you're moving away, whatever. I'm going to put that house on the market. Well, the deed restriction says that you're required to get a new market appraisal. Here's the current value of that home. Multiply it by that 3/4.
That same ratio.
And that's the sales price to the next qualified buyer. Teacher on Sitla land. Well, cities have been mandated by the state to demonstrate that they are actively pursuing affordable housing programs within their city.
Right.
Well, imagine the disadvantage of every year having a quarter of your affordable housing inventory being sold off at market value and no longer qualifies.
No longer qualified.
And frankly, it's unfair to everybody who donates their time or materials or labor to a self-help
organization,
or anybody else who's in a position of subsidizing housing, to allow that to become a windfall for a fortunate, less privileged individual or family. I think it's shameful.
Yeah, I agree. I actually hadn't even thought of it from that perspective, because you can know all the parts, but until you look at the scenario like Habitat for Humanity versus like what this land trust could do, it's a long-term solution that's smart, that's not subsidized by a taxpayer. It's subsidized really only on the front end by the person who's donating land, or in the case of Sitla, somebody that already owns the land. They already have the land in their possession.
In Sitla's case, I mean, their mandate is that they get the most out of their land that they can. And usually that translates into selling it at the highest price, being a partner in a development where there's ongoing revenue, like with STRs or whatever.
Yeah.
In this case, they don't lose the land. They don't lose the value of the land.
Yeah. And
at some point in time, in 100 years, whenever the leases are up, if they chose to, they could they could buy out
Liquidate
the homes at this discounted value and build something new and make more money than they started with.
Exactly. They have a permanent, the SITLA is an organization, and I really want to do a podcast specifically on SITLA because it is a fascinating and unique organization nationwide. And their endowments, from what I've seen, is over $3 billion, just the endowment. So the percentage that they're spending on programs out of SITLA, that's where I'm curious, because I keep hearing this, the highest and best use of the land is what SITLA is mandated to do, or this idea, like this short-term rentals, right? Yeah, that is a great option to do it. I can't read. I don't have the ability to read it, Jeff, but if you want to read something, there's good data in there, just jump in. But it doesn't make sense to me that the amount of money they're spending on programs isn't quite matching what I think their return is as an endowment, because they're using that money and reinvesting it in hedge funds and all these other things because they're using the asset land as leverage. I can only assume. So as soon as it gets put into the program where there's a building on it, now it's money generating in one way, shape, or form. But just selling off the land and using the money and putting it into the development or into the endowment, that's not an option, right? They can't just sell as the SITLA goes, they can't give it to another land trust. They can't, sell it at some kind of cost and put that money into the endowment, can they?
They are already a land trust.
Right.
This is simply a way of broadening their mission to make educational opportunities possible in areas where teacher housing is not attainable.
Right.
And to me, I hope the legislature takes a serious look at expanding SITLA's mission to include making it possible for teachers and school administrators to have housing. And if that needs to occur on SITLA land, I don't think personally that that's inconsistent with what the mission of SITLA ought to be.
I think I agree with you. And we need it, especially in Ivins. And your comment about needing housing, if we could go back to housing too, Black Desert Resort is going to add how many jobs to Ivins?
They claim 3,000.
They claim. Or do you think the jury's still out on that?
I think their studies are very, very thorough and done by some of the best people out there. So I have no reason to question it.
Yeah. So that many people, if they're not living in Ivins, they're going to live in St. George, right? So there's going to be some, need for those houses to come from somewhere. How much would you like of those to retain in Ivins? Is the idea that we can retain a certain percentage of those? Or
did you take our survey, our citywide survey, when we sent it to you?
I did.
Well, the outcome of that survey suggests that our residents really don't want anything else to happen in the city other than low-density residential. So big lots, expensive
They want us to
homes.
make the same mistake Washington did.
Really don't want to see workforce housing built in the city. Mm-hmm. Certainly don't want to see any more high-density housing built in the city or homes built on small lots, so higher density of any kind. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the survey invited folks to define their utopia, right? And so that's the world they'd like.
We were trying to get the best picture of like what's the ideal situation, because we're not going to necessarily land there, but how close can we get?
Basically, a rich bedroom community is what we want to be. We don't want to be bothered with more commercial, even though in 25 years when we reach build out, that commercial development is what's going to sustain the city long term, or we're going to have to triple property tax.
Right.
But if you're 75 years old like I am, maybe that problem out there 25 years is not my worry.
Yeah.
But it's a fact of life. So right now, Ivins City is going through the process of reviewing its general plan, and that translates into reviewing your zoning and development ordinances to comply with the general plan. So where are we going to go? Well, these practical considerations have to be taken into account by a responsible, public body.
Right.
And so we are looking hard at that and what options do we have to maintain the city for it to be sustainable, stable long term.
Yeah.
And how much more commercial beyond what we already have in the books with Black Desert, with Sentier, with the expansion of Red Mountain Resort at some point in time, and a couple of other things. We literally have a parcel of property right in the center of the city there
next to the university.
Right next to Rocky Vista University.
Just perfect. Just prime.
Owned by the same individual, that entire 60 acres or so. And they came to the city with a plan to build downtown Ivins, which we don't have. We don't even have
Not
anything
even close.
resembling a downtown Ivins.
Exactly. We're a white spot in the road.
Well, the way that those sort of central gathering areas succeed is through elevation, through height, multiplying the
Capacity.
the levels, if you will, of the building. So it's so many stories.
Mm-hmm.
In their case, they were proposing to put all of the parking underground, so we didn't have parking lots destroying the appearance of the landscape.
Yep.
But it required three levels above. So they came with these
renderings
and floor plans and site plans and so forth, showing what that would be. Well, our residents didn't want any part of that. So now part of our discussion is, so that's an obvious commercial zone. What do you as residents think that ought to be? In fact, frankly, a week from this coming Wednesday, we have our next talk about.
Yep.
That is going to be on
money.
No, that one's on commercial development. We had
commercial. I missed the money. I missed the money one. I missed the money one.
You missed a good one there, boy.
Oh man, I did miss a good one. The funny thing is that
you can find it online, by the way, and you should as a real estate person.
I'm for sure going to watch it. I'm bummed that I missed it. I'm glad. Was it as successful as the last one? I feel like the water one.
No, I explained to those that were there. It's the difference between the audience that shows up for a budget hearing, public hearing, versus one on a zone change.
Yep.
Fill the room with a zone change. If you want to talk about money, there's only 5 people interested.
I missed it on my calendar, probably specifically because of that. And
but the one coming up is specifically focused on commercial development.
Okay.
What can succeed? Because nobody's going to come and build something. They're not going to invest in developing a commercial center of any kind unless it pencils out. It has to be economically viable, or it's not going to get built. Well, I mean, that's kind of what the residents have said. We don't want it to be built.
Right.
So if we actually end up needing more of it, then what can it be and still succeed? That's kind of the question that I hope we can answer that night.
Well, it's interesting because Ivins has really held off the growth far better than a lot of the other areas did, right?
We just got expensive.
You got expensive fast, but is part of that the policies that the city councils and the mayors that have made over the years has been, we do not want businesses here. We're a bedroom community. The zone is going to be that way, and any opportunity that a developer has said, hey, I have this idea, the public comes out in force. Because a guy in one of them stood up and said, are you trying to kill us all, or you're going to kill us all? Like he legitimately went to somebody is knocking on his door and, pointing a gun at his head.
So you're a little bit off. We've never discouraged commercial development.
Okay.
In fact, our general plan, dating back to my earliest days of involvement with city government,
which goes back,
were 20 years.
20 years.
Were what can Ivins do to attract commercial development? And then it evolved from that discussion to what can we do to attract the right kind of commercial development, because we don't want to have car lots out here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to have a big box store with a massive parking lot out here.
Right.
We're not that kind of a community. We are, in fact, a bedroom community and want to be known as that primarily.
Yeah.
So that long ago, it was determined that the best hope we had for commercial development in the future was to recognize what had brought commercial development in the past. Here sits Red Mountain Resort. Tuacahn was built by then. Movara was coming on the books shortly thereafter. And so we looked and thought, okay, here we have this majestic backdrop.
Just the best.
The most beautiful place. I describe it as one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's like living in a national park.
Totally.
So here is an enormous asset that will be of value not just to us as residents who never grow weary of it, but will also be valuable to those who come and visit here. So it was determined that resort development was probably the most likely and the most preferable type of commercial development that we could ever acquire.
Yeah.
So we set the stage for that. We had areas in the city zoned specifically for that, and we were rewarded.
totally
Not only did we
so far,
get it,
too.
but we got the most incredible type of commercial development, resort commercial development that any city anywhere in the country could have hoped for.
Yeah.
And now
Black
now
Desert
that's underway.
is incredible.
It is incredible.
It is absolutely amazing. A huge, I don't know, a shout out is enough to say what Patrick Manning's done in that development organization. It's
I agree.
masterful. I think it's such a cool thing. I played the golf course myself. I have a torn feeling around the water, right? And I can see how people look at the lava field and being sad about,
Yes,
oh man, look what they're doing to the lava. And also, as I drive down Pioneer Parkway and I wind and I look and I can see one of the holes and it's like that bright green next to the black, and then you have the red mountain in the back. I'm like, it honestly looks way awesome. It looks like an improvement to the space. He's done such a good job at, putting the land and the idea together to where he wants to celebrate the land that they're using, not necessarily just say, hey, we want to put a golf course.
I completely agree. And as you know, there were a large number of skeptics.
Yeah.
There was huge opposition to the project.
To their point, like painting a vision's hard. I mean, you're trying to imagine what it could be, and then what somebody says versus what they deliver. You've
often
seen
not
it,
the same.
Often not the same.
Right.
Like the first idea versus what comes out at the end.
So they have 300 acres in Ivins City and are utilizing approximately 60. The rest of that is going to go into a conservation easement, I'm told, and deed it to Ivins City. So much of that beloved lava field is going to remain open to view in perpetuity.
Yeah,
that's huge. Then beyond that, I mean, yes, they're using water on the golf course. Well, they've at least gone at it with the idea we're going to conserve as much as we can. So the systems they put in place. Same thing with water use throughout the entire project. And then that translated into power use as well, which is going to be one of the next crises that we see.
Yep.
So they've gone with this
low voltage,
the most advanced type of electronic service that they can put in. Got a huge federal loan for doing it, and they're going to be ahead of anyone else anywhere in the way that they utilize resources. Yeah, the way they conserve resources, better put.
And they earned the right for a federal grant. It's an environmental, basically, reward for developments that are putting extraordinary efforts into sustainability and energy conservation and water conservation, all those things. And we got Jeff bringing up the website right here because, oh my gosh, it is incredible. It brings the whole thing back around though to on the water side. St. George owns 4 golf courses, and they don't really. They have supposedly they are making money at this stage, but there was a while there where they were barely breaking even, right? In a golf course business, you're just talking 6 feet of water on top just to have lawn, and you have all these golf courses that right now are getting utilized, but are they always going to get utilized? And is that really the best? Is that the best thing that the city should even own? If it can't economically be taken over by a private organization, why is the city driving that? I don't understand that, but maybe I can talk more to Michelle and them about that.
You'd have to.
But for you in this, because I've heard pushback on the golf course side, and it's like, oh, do we really need another one? And we're going to put it on a lava field. I think they've done you guys have vetted it, and I'm going to give you huge acknowledgement for before you sat down versus how I feel right now. The thoughtfulness that Ivins City put into their development plan was calculated and slow, but encouraged the conversation with the whole community. It's like the whole community has had the opportunity to participate in the conversation. And although it's been slow to develop over time, it's methodical, and I think you're going to get the best city at the end of the road. Because somebody on the city council at one of the meetings said, once we build it, that's what we get. Once we approve that development, that's it. We can't go back and change it, right?
Absolutely correct.
And we don't have a lot to choose from. I think the county-wide, we only have about 11% or 10% of the whole county is privately owned to even be able to make use of. And over time, the federal government owns, SITLA owns a lot of it, state owns a lot of it. Some of those things will get resold to probably private individuals, assuming water. But the that thought process, Ivins, it makes me kind of proud to be a citizen of a little tiny town like that.
Makes me proud too. So,
and you've had a lot to do with that, by the way. You've been in this mix from, you were on planning commission, city council, then mayor, right? You've been a mayor for 11 years?
13 and a half now.
13 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And how much more do you got? You age your own self, but how much more do you got in this?
Well, my term ends in 2.5 years. So
you're going to decide that.
Whatever we're going to do will have to happen between then and now.
Yeah.
But as much as the idea of a golf course seems contradictory to Ivins, and I totally get it. I do. Here we are with the lowest per capita water use anywhere probably in the state, out in Cayenta, right? Mm-hmm. Kudos to them. And now this. So I've chosen to look at the golf course sort of from an agricultural perspective. They're growing a cash crop, and the crop is cash.
It's rolling. Well, so maybe a quick transition, because I am curious, looking at the bedroom community and maintaining the heritage and all that, the economic diversity, if you could, standing outside St. George and Washington as a message out that way, Ivins is going to need St. George to make smart building decisions and housing decisions on increasing density to be able to house the middle income workers that are really going to drive those jobs, right? Because they're not high wage jobs in Ivins, right? And Black Desert, they're not high wage jobs.
Most of them probably not. But the secret, so I'm a developer and builder and designer
by trade. Yeah,
for 55 years now.
Right.
So I know a lot about what it takes to make a project look good, make it sellable. And you're in real estate, this too. So the first thought that comes to the average person's mind when the term high density is used, where would you say that the average person's mind goes? It goes to the worst case scenario.
New York.
Horrible looking buildings, tall, view obliterating buildings, no charm, no nothing redeemable about them, right? Mm-hmm. Well, in my opinion, it's all about the design. I firmly believe that a project could be built high density, medium density, much more affordable than a lot of what we see, and be done in a way, architecturally speaking, that would be attractive, appealing, an enhancement to the city.
Right.
Now, I have yet to see it.
Except for the City Hall in Ivins.
Well, City Hall.
The thing is the reason I bring up City Hall is because it's not a high density, but it is because you have a lot of people working in a small spot, right? It's a organization. When you walk inside, though, it feels way bigger than it looks on the outside. The way it's set into the hillside, the road goes a little higher than it. It doesn't have these massive ceilings on the outside, but when you go inside, you can see it, right? It's the flat roof design structure. So, like to your point, when you think of a city hall and you think of walking in, you think of what Washington County did. Is that when you walk in there, it's nice and tall, right? When you walk in, but Ivins feels nice and tall too, and it's not that big of a building, right?
Well, we didn't need that size of a building, but
the feeling you get when you walk inside, though, is that it is a big building, even though it's not.
We did need a building. Yep. So we had outgrown our existing city hall, probably as much as began outgrowing it 10 years previous to the time we built the new one. Mm-hmm. And so we were pigeonholing people in corners and cubby holes and putting 3 desks in an office that was designed for 2 and doing all the things that you do to try and accommodate your staff. And so the discussion was ongoing as to the need to have ultimately a replacement city hall. And what brought it all together is that when we created SCI, that is our combined law enforcement with Santa Clara, that entity is Ivins' responsibility.
Right.
Just like fire and rescue is Santa Clara's responsibility.
Right.
So we were ultimately responsible for housing SCI. Graciously, Santa Clara had provided them a corner on the upper level of their city hall, which they oversized when they built it. Mm-hmm. But they had outgrown that space as well. So I think that I suggested at some point in time that these two things had come together now to the point that we had to act.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went through the process of selecting an architect and a contractor, and we selected the contractor early on. And because I've been in both building design and construction, I had a lot of things I wanted that building to do. I wanted it. I'm a big solar guy.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, naive little mayor, in my first year, I declared Ivins City to be Solar City America, baby.
Oh, yeah. Bold statement.
we were going to go, well, you may not even know this. Over the years, through grants, particularly when the Great Recession hit,
mm-hmm.
there were a lot of grants available to city governments to install things like solar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we took advantage of that. And so even before City Hall came online, the new one, we had installed solar arrays on the parking structure behind the existing City Hall,
right,
on our fire station, on our recreation building down in Unity Park, and up on the shades, the structure that covers our equipment at our public works yard.
Okay.
So our animal shelter, the public works building, a lot of the buildings in Ivins were essentially either on fully solar powered or on
nice.
solar assist.
I didn't know that.
So roughly 40% of the municipal power requirements, that is the power that the government itself paid for and needed, was supplied by solar.
Wow.
So I was so hopeful
mm-hmm.
that the city council would agree to allow solar to be considered on the new building. Well, our new city hall is power neutral. It's what
That's
they
awesome.
call net zero for
right.
power, and it's also net zero now for water.
That's awesome.
So it is awesome. But beyond that, when we sat down with the architects from VCBO, tremendous group of professionals, I said, I want this building to somehow reflect Ivins City. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like, but there has to be something that a person would look at and identify with the city, its people, the magnificence of the environment here.
Yeah.
The next meeting we had, they came back with pictures of rammed earth walls. And the theme
is that the rammed earth wall right there?
You can see the outside portion of that. It actually extends 70 feet.
Okay.
From the front point to the back point, which is so it extends across the entire south side of our city council chambers.
That's awesome.
So they came back with pictures of that, and the theme for the building, which is the one you and I were chatting about earlier.
Yeah.
Earth, water, and hard work.
Yeah.
So brief history of Ivins City. The Santa Clara Bench was hard, parched red dirt forever.
Yeah.
Nothing much happened up on the Santa Clara Bench because there was not access to irrigation water. Some people tried to pasture cattle and so forth up there. It was terrible for everything.
Yeah, just not helpful. Yeah.
So in 1911, a couple of enterprising engineers figured out a way to bring water from Gunlock across the Red Mountain and drop it off on the bench.
Okay.
So in 1918, the Ivins Reservoir was constructed, oldest reservoir in the county.
Wow.
And that was designed to provide irrigation water for the bench. So we had 13 brave or crazy, but gutsy,
for sure, gutsy and crazy.
Farming families.
Yeah.
In some cases, in exchange for a year's work on that canal, it was cut by teams of horses and blades and plows, right?
Gosh. Yeah.
Cut that canal across the base of the mountain. You can still see where that was as you drive kind of into the reservation on your way over to Mesquite.
Yeah, yeah.
In exchange for that, they received a 1-acre homestead in the new town site. Didn't have the name Ivins at that point in time. It was just a town site.
Yeah.
And honestly, reading the stories, Emma Fife, one of our long-term residents, and their family's been there forever, wrote a history of Ivins that is, it's such a compelling book. Explains the hardships that they went through, and they suffered in just the most unbelievable ways.
Yeah.
No running water, no air conditioning. Here they are living, it was 110 back then too.
Yeah,
Let's not kid ourselves.
Exactly.
Living in tents, boarded up tents in some cases, took them, in some cases, 2 or 3 years to build a modest adobe house.
Wow.
And then in the midst of all that, digging ditches and whatnot to try and get water over onto their fields. And then nothing grew there, sterile soil.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I mean, they planted everything, cherries and peaches and everything else, and the fruit trees didn't do well, apples either.
Right.
But pomegranates did. So you'll see on the statue that we have out in front of our city hall, it's a piece that we commissioned years ago to put in one of our roundabouts and decided it would look better where it now is in front of City Hall.
Yeah.
But it's a tribute to Ivins City, both past and present. And it has, the artist put this evolution of the vegetation from native sagebrush and whatever,
Yeah.
coming around to above the farmer figure that faces down towards Santa Clara from whence they came. It turns into pomegranate limbs with fruit on it.
That's so awesome. Okay, Jeff doesn't have a mic hooked up, but he's highlighting this for us. I think he wants me to read this. New settlement be named after President Anthony Ivins, who had endeared himself to the people in this part of the country through his missionary work with the Indians. That was the founder, President Anthony Ivins.
Well, he wasn't the founder at all. In fact,
Interesting.
It's a bit of an interesting story as to how Ivins
got his name.
Got to
So
be
I guess
known
that's
as Ivins.
got his
so
name.
it was named after Anthony W. Ivins.
So it was named
and
after
he
him.
was both a prominent civic and LDS church official.
Okay.
He was a former mayor of St. George.
Okay.
And he did a lot of work with the Native Americans, and as I understand it, was extremely influential in going back to Washington, D.C. and securing the land that is now the reservation for the Shivwits Band of
crazy.
Paiutes. So he does have that connection there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what endeared him to these early settlers of Ivins was they wanted to build a church out there on the bench.
Yeah.
And he donated $100, as I recall, and the bell. And if you go look in the front yard of the oldest church in town, that's right next to our city hall, actually, right next to the police station.
Yep.
There's a little wishing well looking
I've seen it, yeah.
structure there. Well, in the center of that is the bell that Anthony W. Ivins donated. So when they decided to officially name the city, they contacted Anthony Ivins to see if he would be willing to let them use that name because they admired him so much. And he said, only if you'll spell it right. So we've been called Ivins and a lot of other things, but Ivins is named after him.
Named after him. Well, that's pretty interesting. The city hall, I think, is going back to, what can you do when you think about a project in a sustainable way that you check boxes that are important to you in the community. The city hall does so well. And then so kind of going back to my first question with St. George is how do we encourage other than dialogue, but how do we encourage increasing the densities in some places where we know we're going to have to increase the density? Because in my mind, it's a complex housing affordability. I can't remember what you said exactly. How you described that word, the affordability. Is like
attainability,
mm-hmm. or affordability, or whatever euphemism we decide to use in what's the lower income bracket going to do about a house, right? How are we going to help those people live? And in my mind, it's a pure numbers. It's a pure numbers game. It's specific units that are housing. What does somebody between the ages of 18 and 25 really need and want right now in culture? Because what they wanted 50 years ago is different than what they want now.
Sure.
But how do we build that at a high enough number to create the workforce and give them a place of the workforce to come into the area to support all these jobs that are being created by these businesses, right? It's a chicken and the egg kind of dance back and forth. But at some point, we have to increase density. We got to get the numbers up. And communities like Ivins, where they've been strategic about it, there is some density measures that Ivins takes. But how do we encourage that out of these other cities? I mean,
Ivins doesn't have a lot of influence over other cities or their policies.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd lead by example, and Ivins City has certainly led the way when it comes to water conservation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we've done, for example, in our city hall has been noted by other communities that may be looking to do similar things. So looking back at City Hall, for example, once again, when it comes to being exemplary, when we sat with the architects, I said, I want to have a significant passive solar presence in the building. I want to be able to bring natural light through the building so that the lighting requirements are nominal. And when you walk through City Hall, there are several things that you'll note. For one thing, the roof lines are interesting, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a standard gabled or hip roof or anything like that. In fact, it's what they call a butterfly type of roof, where the pitches are going at different angles and sloping towards the center in some cases, right? But you'll see that every pitch has a purpose. Those that slope to the south have sloped in such a way that it makes accessible a bank of clerestory windows that brings natural light in the fall and winter and early spring.
Right.
When the sun angle comes up, no light, no added heat, whatever. That's what passive solar is all about.
Right.
But beyond that, we used glass partitions on all of the offices within the building. So that light that's drawn in on the exterior walls or above the central hallway radiates into our conference rooms and our offices because
bounces around.
They're windows.
Yeah.
On the fronts of those offices.
Yeah.
So that was another thing. Mm-hmm. The water conservation thing was a big deal as well, and we wanted that building to be multi-purpose so that more than just holding city council meetings there in those council chambers, it could be cleared out and used for other kinds of functions. And we've had several there. We actually have a patio area, if you want to call it that, with 3 sets of doors opening out onto that, so that in some sorts of social settings, you can go out and have a snack or a sandwich or whatever. Yeah. And it's proven to be a wonderful additional feature to the building. But here's another one of the clinchers that refers to what you were just talking about. And I give so much credit to a city council that was very conservative, but could see the value in these things like the solar part of it. I wanted it to be the most efficient building that it could be. And when it comes to heating and cooling, that translates into a very expensive system called ground source heat pump.
Okay.
So under our west parking lot, we have, I want to say 18 or 20 wells that draw water from an aquifer down 300 and some odd feet, up through heat exchangers in our big mechanical room, and then right back into the ground. We don't use a drop of it.
Right.
It's just used to condition the fluid that goes through the series of heat pumps within the building
that cool it and heat
that heat it and cool it. And because it's such a sophisticated system, each one of our staff can set the temperature in their own room to whatever is comfortable for them.
Yeah.
So every office could be a different temperature inside.
That's pretty fancy.
But that mechanical room is a mechanical work of art. And that's how I describe it. It is, if you came to visit the City Hall, if you wanted me to take you on a tour.
I want to, yeah.
I'm going to take you to that room and say, this is my favorite room. If they'd let me put my desk in here, it would be my office.
That's awesome. Well, and you said expensive.
Yeah, it costs us another $85,000 over the next level of efficiency, which is an air-to-air heat pump. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty good, but not nearly as good as this.
Right.
But so a city building like this is a 100-year building.
Yeah.
Or more.
Good point. 100 years.
So when something pays for itself in 7 to 10 years, or in the case of the heating and cooling system, 15, I think was the calculation. Mm-hmm. And now with inflation, who knows, that could have been reduced even further.
Right.
What about the next 85 years plus?
Yeah.
It's all bonus, right?
It's all bonus.
It's all money that is paying you back.
And that's what I think it's important that the governments are looking at, that long-term, perspective on how do we develop. And it's a unique one. We're coming up. We got 15 minutes left. I want
wherever you want to go.
I want to know.
Oh,
There's so many good
let's
things.
let's jump back to the housing thing because I sort of stepped aside.
Yeah, because the housing is important because I want to. It's in my perspective, it seems like Ivins is going to be a little bit of a burden on the other cities because somebody's got to make a decision for houses. If Ivins isn't, and they don't want density,
what is not appreciated or liked in our community, and I've got to say we kind of got the bait and switch thing on us. So we approved a bunch of high density two-story housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unattractive buildings in the minds of many, and under the guise that they were going to be affordable. Well, what happens? They're sold at market value,
right?
And they weren't affordable.
There
are a few that have been built over there that were under specific programs that will qualify for median income households, but not many.
I think you're talking about the stuff that's just up the 91 past Movara, right? Or is that like the high density stuff that's going up over there?
Near Movara, a lot of it, huh?
Yeah, okay.
And I don't fault that. I mean,
market value is the market value.
We don't have 5-story buildings sitting out there anywhere. I mean, they fell within the limits that we set up. They qualified, and so they're built. But I have an interesting take, I think, on housing affordability. Okay. If we were really serious about affordable housing, if we were honestly going to create affordable housing, well, look to the past. Ivins City, at one point in time, was a few modest farmhouses and some trailer parks. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not advocating for trailer parks. They're actually illegal in Ivins City and probably in many other communities. But you want to have an affordable house? I can go online today and buy a manufactured home for beginning around $75,000 and a pretty dang nice one for $150,000. And by manufactured, I'm also including modular housing that comes in rooms and you just attach them together.
Yep.
So you got to have the land for it. Modest piece of land, right? High density, 4,000 square foot lots or whatever. And there's infrastructure there. But let's say that lot is, since it's half the size and whatnot, is maybe $75,000 to $100,000. And I've got to put a foundation in. Let's say that's another 15 or so. But for $250,000, I can put up an affordable house, an affordable 3-bedroom home. Yep. Do we see it happening?
How come?
Well, we want to build everything. We want to manufacture it here. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that there are solutions that we refuse to look at.
So if somebody came to the city council in Ivins and said, hey, I want to put up manufactured, because a certain zoning, we got to get approval. And if I say, hey, I have this idea where they could buy a manufactured house, I'd do a subdivision, and this is an option for them, you're saying the city council would consider that?
Well, for one thing, federal law prohibits us from excluding manufactured housing. Okay. Now that's a little different thing than a mobile home, a trailer that's on wheels, right?
Right.
A lot of manufactured housing shows up on wheels, but then it's placed on a foundation. Right. So there are some definitions that you have to get to the bottom of. Right. But we legally could not deny a manufactured housing project. And here's an interesting thing. In Ivins, we hear complaints regularly about monitoring color and height. You know, they don't like the height because it gets in the way of that spectacular view of the mountain, right?
Agreed.
Well, take a look at manufactured or modular housing. Very rarely do you see anything that has any height to it. Right. And they're intentionally condensed in size, very efficient floor plans. And so I'm sure that when folks listen to this, they're going to hear me as advocating this. I'm not doing that so much as I'm saying, look, this affordable housing conversation stops short of a real honest conversation about some things that could actually provide affordable housing.
Yeah. Well, I think the point being developers, because it's a small group in Southern Utah, truthfully, that there's a small group of people that own the biggest tracts of land, from my opinion.
That's true.
And so that shot caller group, right? Those people that are deciding what happens with their land. It's a big debate, right? Whether it's like, I'm going to hold on to it till I pass away and then give it to my kids. And then the kids ultimately end up, parsing it off into little tiny pieces and selling it off to developers. And it's whoever they know at the time typically is the one raising their hand. There's very rarely that, from my perspective, there's rarely a time where a piece of land goes up with a for sale sign that kind of doesn't already have a plan attached to it. There's very rare is it's just like this vacant, nobody has an idea of anything they do there, right? Everybody seems like they have an idea, but the ones that can actually foot the money and the general contractor and do the sale all at the same time, it's a hard mix to put together. You know, I've tried several times with Sitla or different developments to try and tackle the affordability problem. And the amount of barriers that I run into and have run into, it's exhausting. You know, I'll spend, you know, months and months meeting with city council people or, you know, coming up, looking over the map of the county and the different zones and trying to find, okay, what's the fastest path to higher density, right? And okay, we got low density over here, 10,000 square foot lots, right? Versus a 4,000 square foot lot. You know, majority of it is a 10,000 square foot lot. And when you start to put a pencil to the paper, it doesn't make sense to build a small house there. It makes more sense to build a really nice luxury house. Your profitability goes up when you have that, when you maximize the land value and the stuff that you put into it.
So there has to be another motivation.
So there's got to be another motivation. So for me, I'm like altruistic, thinking kind of in a naive way, because I don't have my own money to do it, right? I just have the idea and the knowledge to be like, oh, how do I put these pieces together? So finding the finance guy, the guy that can build it, and then, you know, the will all at once, it's few and far between. It's not an easy job to do. So I can see why it goes to the highest bidders.
Let's face it, it's all market driven.
Yeah.
So if you're a developer and you're acquiring land, the first thing you're going to do is analyze the highest and best use.
Mm-hmm.
So what is going to net for me the highest profits? Is it going to be low density with expensive homes, all custom or whatever? Or is it going to be a tract type of thing? Is it going to be high density to try and satisfy some of this need for housing with so many people coming into the area?
Mm-hmm.
What's it going to be?
Right.
In Ivins' case, most of the rest of the city that's not developed is going to have to come through the city for rezoning. We have most of the remaining property in Ivins that is in a zone that it will likely be appealed. There will be a request to have a zone changed. So we do have, in a way, the destiny of the city in our hands as a city.
Mm-hmm.
I just hope that we can be very clear, because what developers want, and I am one, so I know this, when we go to a city to develop, what we want is clarity.
Mm-hmm.
We want to know what the city wants, because it's costly to get into a big battle, right? Either with the city or its residents.
Yep.
So the best thing in the world is to know what the city wants and then go put together a good version of that and come and get it approved and build it.
Agreed.
And my hope is as we go through the revision of the general plan, revise our development ordinances and zoning ordinances and so forth, that we very thoughtfully look at what remains available in our city. And in our case, and this is really true everywhere, but certainly in our case, that also means open space. How do we keep the flavor of a small rural bedroom community with some agricultural component to it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the survey yielded that folks want us to buy all the remaining farmland and leave it just in some kind of a trust to be farmed and remain looking like that.
Really?
In perpetuity. Yeah.
Interesting.
And we're looking at how do you do that? And there are entities out there, the Virgin River Trust, for example. That's what they do. They take money from whatever source they can get it and acquire land and buy the development rights so it goes into conservation easements and remains that way forever.
Yeah. Well, but somebody's got to maintain it, and it has, because it's a subsidy at that point, though, right? Because they don't make money.
No,
a farm doesn't make money.
Yeah, they continue to farm it and make money farming it.
How profitable is the farming of the land that we got?
What a conservation easement is purchasing development rights.
Okay.
Meaning you can farm it forever. You can sell it to somebody who will farm it. You can give it to the city to turn into a park. You can do whatever doesn't develop this into housing or businesses. Yeah.
Yeah. And you think do you, that's what the city, if that's what the city wants, right? You're facilitating that at the city. Do you personally think that the farming is, because we basically grow alfalfa and that's it, right?
Oh, they grow different things in the remaining, fields that we still have in the city.
How much, but is it primarily alfalfa or?
You see a lot of alfalfa, at least the fields that I drive by regularly, you do see a lot of that.
Yeah.
And there's farmland that lays fallow that's not being used at all, right? But most of us love the fact that we can drive by and see.
I love it too.
See a field like that.
I drive by Unity to drop my son off at Vista, and there's, S&S is putting up the subdivision that's over there in the corner next to the Haven. And on the right side, right, the sprinklers are just going and going and going. There's a little field there. You got the bamboo field. So some of it I laugh at because I'm like, it's just, it's kind of such a hodgepodgey town, right? Because you just drive by these things that are quirky and
it's
unique.
Old and new, right?
It's old and new. It's so true.
And so the old is what old was.
Yep.
And they used that bamboo as a shield against the wind and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Fact is, it's a weed. It's a noxious weed.
Yeah.
And highly susceptible to fire. Mm-hmm. So kind of dangerous, right?
Yeah.
But you don't tell somebody who's had a home there for 75 years that they get to tear it.
They got to chop it all down.
Tear it all down.
Yeah, they could.
So what we have is an ordinance that says, okay, if that catches on fire and burns, it doesn't get to grow again.
Yeah.
We deroot it. You can't replace it.
Yeah. Yeah. If it causes a hazard, there's got to be, let's do something better when it goes away.
I mean, there was a 4th of July incident in one of the pieces that you're aware of.
Yeah.
Somebody shot some kind of a bottle rocket straight at it and it caught it on fire. And so you drive around the block there that used to be completely surrounded by this stuff. It's not actually bamboo per se. It's another. It's
a hybrid. It's a desert hybrid.
Yeah, it's something different. But there's a hole in it now. And so we do actively enforce that requirement.
No more bamboo stuff. But so going back to the point with the farmland, I know we use a lot of water on the farm and the grass and things like that. From my calculations, we have 7 million acre feet of water that drops in our basin from Pine and also from, basically Iron County and that mountain, Cedar Mountain, running this way. We have 7, from my calculation, it was 7 million. Am I off on that? Do you happen to know? It's like a total amount of water.
It varies so much year to year. I couldn't tell you that there's an average. There probably is, but I don't know that.
I think
number.
I calculated because I went on UtahWater.org and I pulled up the zone, the water district zones and added them up. It took me a minute. I added up how much water is this source, and then that was over a 3-year period of time from 2019 until now, because I think the data gave me up till, I guess, all through 2022. Maybe it was only one. Maybe I went 18 to 21. So I went over a 3-year period of time. And I think the average was about 7 million acre feet of water in that zone. It was Excel sheets. I did that and then I moved them over. And our municipal and industrial usage is only 1 million acre feet of water. So thinking of if we have 1 million of acre feet of water being used in M&I, and then basically agriculture, but that's going to loop into, there's non-potable water in that 7 million. There's stuff that we just can't reuse because it's too expensive, which is the question I asked Zach after one of the sessions. I asked him, I said, from what I understand, our percentage of M&I used is only about 1%, or a little bit more than 1% of the total water that falls in the zone, and we're supposed to conserve that amount, right? We're trying to conserve, basically a little, it's let's say 2%. We're trying to conserve of the 2%, 98% of it is going into the agricultural, bucket. I'm trying to understand how to reconcile those two numbers and understand those. And maybe I'm off on the calculation.
So ag across the state and really probably across the nation has priority water rights, right? So we could all have water not running in our taps, and they would be entitled to their water for agriculture. Right. Now, the big question to me is what happens when farmland is converted to development, and
the efficiency goes up, right? It goes way up.
So water rights are sold separately from the land, and I don't know how in the world you do it. I do know there are places that have requirements like this. But I think at some point in time, we're going to have to figure out how to tie the water to the land. So if a developer's buying land, he darn well better buy the water rights that go with that land, because the expectation is that a developer is going to build houses and expect the water district to provide the water, right? Well, that's another fix that we've got to get put in place sometime sooner than later.
Yeah.
So that water goes with the land, because it can either be used to grow crops, or it can be used to fill bathtubs and kitchen
Showers
sinks
and
right. And I don't know the mechanism to do that. I know it's very, very complicated because I've tossed this idea out and it's been thrown back in my face more than once. But it's a huge, and another huge issue when it comes to agriculture is there are techniques that ag can use to drastically reduce the amount of water they use.
This is what I was thinking,
but
too.
They're stuck with archaic state laws that penalize them for not using all their water.
If you don't use it, you lose it,
exactly.
Right? Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
We have got to come up with some amended state law that does not penalize farmers for becoming efficient. That water could be used elsewhere, but they need to get credit for it, be paid for it.
Right.
But it's one of the cheapest, easiest resources that we have is conservation on the ag level, and we've done a very poor job of that.
And if we conserve it, because we're running out of time here, if we conserve it, my thought is this: this term I don't quite understand, but they call it a food desert. If we trucks stop rolling in, we can't provide the resources for our local community. We've got 3 days worth of food, from what I understood. St. George City did the survey. Danielle Larkin came on and chatted with me about it, and we got 3 days worth of food in town before we're out. If the trucks stop.
I believe that.
And knowing that, we could do a better job with the ag that we have. If alfalfa is what we're growing, goes to the cows to feed the cows, to then we get the meat, I get the circle at that point. But what else could we be doing with the land and the ag that we have to provide different food sources outside of just the alfalfa, with a more efficient water system? If I'm going to subsidize something, because we're subsidizing at this point, if it's not inflation that's taking our money, it's taxes. Right? The inflation is a separate way of taxing an individual, right? And so if we can't agree on taxing the right things to encourage the stuff that we want, then we're left with inflation in stuff we can't control, in my mind.
Yeah.
And so if those two are the case, how does the local groups and the local smart people, because I'm not one of them, but like how do we make sure that those people are communicating each other to try to improve this innovation in the agricultural thing? I think this is a great conversation. I hope that the experts in those fields are really running with.
The innovation is really there, and it's improving all the time, just like other technological industries.
Yeah.
The trick is, once again, with agriculture, you're talking about markets.
Mm-hmm.
So what they grow here doesn't necessarily stay here. How do you incentivize somebody growing the stuff that we would eat here? Well, I'm going to throw something at you. I think that becomes that's going to happen more easily at a personal level, putting in gardens, little mini greenhouses, things that would allow you to sustain your family or your neighborhood.
Community gardens?
Community gardens. We have one.
Yeah.
Very, very lightly used.
Yeah.
Right. But I think we would all love to see agriculture remain in the mix of our city landscape. But
it's a sustainability conversation, right? It ends up being a sustainability
and I would say that your generation and younger would look differently at that than maybe older generations would. So,
which is why we've got to get out the vote.
The farmer,
good transition, Chris.
The farmer who refuses to sell his land, that doesn't mean that land is never going to be available, because when he dies, very often, the kids can hardly wait to get rid of it because they saw how hard dad and mom worked. And they don't want any part of that.
Or they're chomping at the bit to see how much money they can make out of development, right?
Well,
I think it's like one of those two stories.
Here's our inheritance. Do we want it in the form of land?
Yeah.
Or do we want it in the form of something that will let us build a house and buy a decent car and whatever?
Right. And so back to our generation looking at it differently, but my generation doesn't show up to the polls as much, right? And so part of this, the rock the vote, because we're out of time. It's 1:05. You got an appointment to get to.
All right.
Thanks for being here. This was a good conversation. I could probably talk to you for like 4 more hours, but hopefully you'll come back on and share a ton of your experience, because you're a super smart guy. I think that was clear from the interview, but rock the vote. We're trying to get 18 to 30-year-olds out, get them registered, get them out to the polls, make sure they're voting in the primaries and the general election to get educated. So I'm going to do a voter information booth that I'm going to move all over town, trying to increase registrations. It'll have information. It'll have links to these videos for the different elected officials, topics specific to water and housing affordability, economic development, energy, transportation, infrastructure. They can get information about that in their local area at this booth, at the voter information booth. So I hope it's a good campaign. It's going to go all summer long, and I hope you kind of participate with us, at least in connecting with the local population and educating them.
So this is a fact. The majority rules.
Majority rules.
So what you want to see happen, you can only make happen when you make a majority to make it happen.
Yep.
So if you have listeners out there who think that there are changes that ought to be made, not only go out and vote. I mean, that is the basic thing.
Yeah.
Run for city council. Try and serve in some capacity.
Because you're going to learn
your
so
city.
much from it.
Go online and learn about your city. Find out what it is that you're a part of.
Yeah.
Get to know your neighbors, for heaven's sakes. Just try and help build a community, for one thing, a rapidly growing community.
Not to tear it down, to build it up. Like this is the thing is we're so used to people coming in trying to tear down the systems. Like somebody comes into an Ivins City Council meeting, not participating one time in 10 years, and then they want to say, you're trying to ruin this place that I just moved here about, right?
So you may come to the conclusion you want to tear it down and start over.
Right.
But you,
get involved.
In my opinion, you are obligated to understand what it is you're going to tear down.
Yeah.
So learn about your city.
Yeah.
Participate in any way you can in your city. For sure, get out and vote, and realize that your influence will make a difference in the way that your city, wherever you live, is going to be. If you think clearly, present yourself clearly, and have an idea that really is an idea that is worth incorporating into the ordinance structure of your community.
Yeah. You get out there and talk about it. So I'm going to wrap with that.
Okay.
Get out and vote. If you want to run June 1st through the 7th, that's your window of time. If you want to run for office, that's your filing date. You got to walk into the city, fill out the paperwork, pay the little fee, and then get out there and run for an office and make a change in the community. But thanks for being here, Chris. Appreciate it. Mayor
Glad
Hart.
to do it. Thanks. It was fun.
All right. See ya.